So as to the question of teaching style, you might call it teaching personality or teaching persona, maybe.
Yep.
I guess what I would compare that to is, here's the English extension to in me coming out, okay?
Yep.
I've always thought of teaching moves and strategies. I've pictured them in my head a little bit like a toolbox. There's a screwdriver and a hammer and a tape measure and all the things, right? Now, anyone who wants to, say for example, I don't know, put together a bookshelf, assemble a bookshelf, right? It's like, you just need to have these particular tools. You can't assemble the bookshelf without using all of the tools. But it's just a fact that every human being who comes to approach this task will have a different set of muscles. Maybe someone's right-handed, someone's left-handed, and there's an aspect of this particular task that I'm really good at. And there's an aspect that I'm not that great at, but I must use this tool nonetheless. I know, for instance, that I have apparently, this has been told to me objectively, so I have no way of measuring this, but I've just been given it on authority, that I have very little strength to lift things, but I've got pretty decent grip strength, right? And those two things are related but not the same.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, you know, when I get to this stage, can I lift up the bookshelf? It's like, no, I need help for that one, right? But then for this stage, it's like, no, I can screw all of these things in and I have no problem with that. So there are different tools that are easier for me to use, but I do have to go some effort to learn all of the tools. Otherwise, I'm just not going to be able to do the task in its entirety and be comprehensive, right? So bringing that back to this conversation, I think that every teacher is different. You know, in terms of what's going on at the front of the room, I think it's important to mention, because it's not at face value on the question, a lot of what I think, at least personally, makes what I'm doing at the front of the classroom engaging to students when they're sat there engaged with me is what I do when I'm not at the front of the classroom. And this is really obvious for anyone who watches any of my videos and that kind of thing. Hopefully, you can tell pretty quickly I know the names of every single one of my students, and I bring in to what I'm doing at the front of the classroom, I bring in their thinking and their responses and their work from what's happening between each of the bits that you see on camera. There's all of the me sitting down beside a student and saying, okay, what's going on? Oh, there's this misconception, or oh, that was a really clever way of solving it that I didn't think of, right? And so I think that goes a long way, but it's invisible because it's happening off camera, as it were, right? So that's the first thing to say. But then the second thing is, I know, as an example, let's talk, what is the grip strength that I'm talking about? Well, in teaching terms, I know that I tell stories. And I think all teachers have to learn to tell stories in some way, shape or form, because stories are actually an inbuilt way that human beings learn. So if you try to teach and never ever tell stories, and when I say stories, I don't just mean once upon a time, I mean we're trying to complete the square. And we have this scenario, we have this problem that we need to overcome through what tool will we use? What can we try? It's like, there's a story, right? There's a narrative structure to that. I know that that's a skill that I've honed over the course of 4 years of doing drama when I was at school, and learning to use that as a move within my teaching. And I lean on that reflexively. And so I know I do that kind of without thinking because it's something I'm good at, but there are other aspects that I'm not good at. Questioning, as an example, that is not something that has ever come to me intuitively. It's so counterintuitively that I'd probably say for the first 3 or 4 years of my teaching, so way beyond where you're at, I didn't even know that was really a skill to be developed. And I'd seen it hundreds and thousands of times, but I guess it's one of those things where one of the characteristics of experts is that they make difficult things look easy, and their expertise becomes sort of invisible to others and even to themselves. And so I would ask a teacher, like, how do you do this? And very few of them ever said, like, work on your questioning technique. So I didn't even know it was a category, right? So that's something when I've thought about, what's the difference between an advancing question and an assessing question? What are all the different ways that I can pose a question to a student so that I don't give them the answer, but I help elicit their own thinking, because that's actually the bit that will help them learn. I'm more times than not, me providing the answer short circuits their thinking. And so that is a skill, wildly counterintuitive. In fact, I've met very few people who are just naturally good at that. They have to develop that, right? So that's a thing which I would say is a bit like me lifting up the bookshelf, right? It's like those are weak muscles, but they can be developed for sure. And I think that, that also goes back to the original question. When I'm up the front of the classroom, I probably don't get past 3 or 4 sentences at a time before asking another question. And sometimes the question I ask might seem really base and trivial. Like, hey, what is this thing called again? It starts with an O. We looked at this a few lessons ago. Orthogonal, that's right. Do you remember what orthogonal means? And it's, and they're little things, but each of them is are you with me? Are you still with me? Are you connecting this to this tangential idea that actually will relate? So I guess what I'm trying to say here, and I'm really just scratching the surface of this question, is I do think there are such a thing as teaching styles that one teacher will favor over another, but I equally think it's the responsibility of every teacher to be as broad as possible and to learn as many of the different tools in the toolbox as they can, because it just equips you to solve a broader range of problems, work with a broader range of students, and I think that's what counts.